Since it's 11:30, we're going to start, but I'm going to invite everybody else, if you want, go ahead in the chat and put in where you are and one highlight of your Tu B'Shvat so far. But we're going to begin. And I simply want to say it's a real pleasure to be here. It's great that we're part of this Climate Fest online. It's great to welcome everybody. Here in New York, the sun is shining, and it's not just shining literally. It really does feel like it's the start of a new year. It's the start of a new cycle for this country. And it's therefore an exciting moment to figure out what Tu B'Shvat means in the 21st century. Here we are, we have this tradition of a new year for trees, which in itself has an ancient and beautiful history. But one of the things that's fascinating is that the 20th century was a century of deforestation. The state of Israel was the only country on planet Earth to end the 20th century with more trees than it began. And that's partly because we had a tradition of Tu B'Shvat, of having a new year for trees. And it's partly also, I think, because we call the Torah, it's Hayim, the tree of life. And the reason I mention that in particular is because we don't always think about the clear relationship between Jewish tradition on the one hand, which we sometimes put in the box of religion or ritual or family or synagogue, and the wider world and public policy. But that in a sense is the focus of this whole online Climate Fest. It's why it's happening over Tu B'Shvat, and it's why I'm excited to welcome everybody to this panel. So my name's Nigel Savage. I'm the CEO of Hazon. We're at this point the largest environmental organization in the American Jewish community, and the word Hazon means vision. And we're trying not merely to envision, but to create a Jewish community in which to be Jewish is necessarily to work for a more sustainable world for everybody. I'm incredibly excited to welcome all of you to this session, and particularly our four panelists, each of whom I know, some better than others, each of whom really deeply I like and respect, and I'm excited to share this time with. So I'm gonna invite the four of them in a first round to say a couple of sentences about what it is that they do in relationship to the intersection of Jewish and climate, and how you came to do that, and one or two things that are exciting to you about that. And then we're going to go forwards from that and ask some other questions. It's a nice, tight, punchy session. We're going to end within an hour. And certainly at some point, I share this to our participants for a little bit later on. There's going to be a chance if you want to put a question for yourselves in the chat to go first. So we've got Anna, Becky, Sue, and Yakir. And I think Anna, since you are the youngest panelist, and we should all live till 120, but if we do all live till 120, you will be on planet Earth in 2100 when some of the rest of us may not. So whatever we all do is going to be most consequential for your life. I want to welcome you, and I want to invite you to go first. Tell us a little bit about you and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement and what you've been up to.
Yeah, I'd love to. So first, I just want to say I'm so grateful to be here on this panel, participating in this really important discussion with the other panelists. So just a little bit of background about myself. I'm a high school student at the Abraham Joshua Heschel School, which is a small pluralistic Jewish day school in New York City. And I'm also the public relations director for the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. So I want to share a little bit about my story and how I became involved in climate activism. I first realized the severity of the climate crisis a couple of years ago, when I read that we had only 12 years to avoid the most catastrophic, irreversible impacts of climate change. And I still remember my initial reaction to that. My thought was that at that point, after those 12 years, I would still only be a young adult. I would be in my 20s. And that's when it really clicked for me that the climate crisis was going to be an issue that would define my entire life, from the time I was a teenager through my adulthood. So obviously my first reaction after figuring that out was, what can I do to try to avert this catastrophic event that's going to have such an impact on my life? I first tried individual action, becoming a vegetarian and thinking about eating sustainably, but I was still kind of seeking a broader network where I could push for change. I started an environmental club at my school where we worked on local projects and advocated for my school to become more sustainable, but I still really wanted to connect with that network of people who shared my values and commitment to fighting the climate crisis. And that's what I really found in JYCM. So JYCM, or the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, was founded by Hazon in early 2020 and it's the first Jewish youth-led movement designed for advocating for climate action. So some of our goals are to use Jewish values as a motivation to fight the climate crisis, to increase Jewish engagement with the environment, and to give Jewish youth a voice in the broader climate movement. JYCM has a central leadership board and is also expanding into a whole network of chapters around the country. So on a personal level, I've been involved in enacting our campaigns, supporting our expansion, and shaping the overall trajectory of the movement. Recently, we've undertaken a storytelling campaign, the idea behind which is to increase people's empathy with each other in relation to the climate crisis by sharing their climate stories, which means how climate change has impacted them or how they initially became concerned about climate change. And that whole idea of activism through storytelling has been really meaningful for me personally. JYCM has also been super fulfilling for me in mobilizing the community that I've been raised in to fight for a sustainable future. And it's been especially inspiring for me to spotlight youth voices because I feel that youth have so much to add to the climate movement. And in many ways, youth are the driving force behind it. They are the passion, they are the energy that is going to lead this movement forward into the future. So that's my story of my journey with environmentalism and my involvement with JYCM.
Thank you. Well, welcome. And I just want to say it's really lovely to see you, and I continue to be reminded as I listen to you what it is to like go for it and have clarity. And really thank you. So I'm going to go from you to sunny Denver, Colorado, and the Honorable Sue Salinger. We first met Sue when she was a volunteer in Boulder, Colorado, and then she ran Hazon's work in Detroit. Sorry about the siren behind us. And now runs a car farm in Denver. And Sue, you're an amazing person. You've done incredible work in Boulder and Detroit and now Denver. Tell us a little bit about how you got to be here and what you're up to.
Sure. I also am very grateful to be part of these conversations because there is so much work happening now, so much more work in the Jewish community than was happening, say, a decade ago. So we're in an incredible moment where we can shift some things. I right now am running Ikar Farm, which is a tiny operation. We grow on 2 acres. We're a Jewish-inspired community farm that serves as a commons to connect people to food justice and environmental justice. We have about last year, even with COVID, we had about 6,000 people that we engaged with in our educational programs. We grow food for donation. We grew about 22,000 pounds last year, which is 10 times what we grew the year before in order to respond to COVID. And we get a chance to work with congregations and Jewish organizations kind of on the edge of or on the border between the Jewish community and the justice communities. So we are trying to weave together the Jewish community and provide a space for the Jewish community to become more active in larger community issues, but also Jewish issues. I want to say that I'm really excited about a program that we're doing with Hazon. We're sort of like the franchisee or the Denver coordinators of Hazon's Seal of Sustainability program, of which I am a huge, huge fan. We have 13 congregations in Denver and Boulder who are participating, including both JCCs. And it's kind of a custom facilitation work to help each organization make change in their organizational policy and operations so that collectively as a Jewish community, we can work towards what Nigel mentioned, which is that people will have a perception and it'll be the truth and the actuality that to be Jewish necessarily means that we're working on climate issues and protecting the climate. It's been super inspirational for me to be able to do that work in Detroit and see it really make a difference. The reason I got involved, I don't know why I got involved in climate work, but I can share with you that one of my earliest memories, I think I was 10, is one of the first Earth days. My parents had been watching on TV the Erie, the lake in Michigan being on fire. And that was the kickoff of the environmental movement of a generation ago. And I remember them dragging us out to clean the Rouge River. So since then, I've had the opportunity to work on media projects for environmental movements with Free Speech TV, and then privileged to be able to work with Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, the founder of the Jewish Renewal Movement in Boulder, who really that experience really shifted me to go into Jewish environmental educational work, which I did in Boulder at Congregation Neve Kodesh and in Michigan at a Reformed congregation, Temple Emmanuel. It was during the time when Hazon had just come to Boulder, and Becky, who we'll talk in a moment, had done so much work, and we were able as a congregation to really move environmental work forward in our congregation. So I couldn't be happier than doing this work, and it's a super important time.
Sue, thank you for that. And that's obviously a great segue, Becky, to you. And I would simply say for everybody, Becky and I have had the pleasure now of working together for 10 years, and it's a pleasure because she didn't kill me. So obviously, like, you know, that was all good. And I also, Becky, in introducing you, I think I want to say, and for everybody, one of the things that I think is an interesting question for all of us is like the locus of where we work, where and how, what level. And one of the things that I think is really interesting in the time that you've been in Boulder, and partly because of you, and partly also supported by Sue and other people, Boulder is one of the places where the community is large enough, it's not just one shul, but it's small enough you can kind of get your hands around it. And people should know that Becky's now Hazon's Director of Food and Climate nationally. But I think of what you're doing as being partly taking some of the things that you actually did in Boulder and playing them out on a larger stage. So I'd love to hear from you, same thing, a bit about how you came here, what's exciting to you, some opening things you want to share.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tu B'Shvat. I was reflecting in the Tu B'Shvat Seder that I was participating in last night about my earliest Tu B'Shvat memories. And I was born and raised in Tallahassee, Florida. And that is a place where indeed you can plant trees at Tu B'Shvat this time of year. And in fact, we did at my synagogue. And what we would do is we'd make paper ornaments. And for every child that had been born in the temple that year, they had a paper with their name put on it with crayon, and we used yarn, and we hung them all like ornaments on these Tu B'Shvat trees every year. And so I had that connection to that holiday from the earliest time. But what really woke up my environmentalism was, and I know it sounds so cliche, so I'm a little embarrassed that it's like my story, but I read Walden while I was in college, and that just pinged everything for me. And I was like, oh. And it was, I think, my Jewish upbringing that had created the fertile ground on which Walden could land and then birth an environmentalist out of me. And over the years, I've been Jewish and I've been an environmentalist. And over the years, I've become a Jewish environmentalist, which I'm happy to speak more about later. But as Nigel said, I'm the Director of Food and Climate at Hazon. And what that means, because what the heck is a Director of Food and Climate, is I help Jewish individuals and organizations understand the connections between their food choices and climate change, and provide the inspiration and resources to support them in taking action to make more sustainable choices. And the particular things that we focus on, where the highest impact is between food and climate change, why I'm very excited to be working on this, is reducing food waste and transitioning plant-rich diets. And if you look at Project Drawdown, one of the preeminent climate change research organizations, you'll see that those are among the very top actions we need to be taking to not only slow down, but eventually stop and reverse climate change. So it feels just very exciting to be working on something that's so significant in terms of what we need to be doing. A tagline of his own is, we are facing environmental crisis, Jewish tradition compels us to respond, and we need to respond with as much urgency as the crisis itself. And so working on some of that high impact behavior is really important and exciting. And so briefly about Boulder versus working in Boulder was really exciting because it was the size of community where I could literally say I've worked with every Jewish organization here. And so I was working with, as small as the community we are, we actually have about 4 Chabads covering the area. I worked with all 4 Chabads, with Hillel, with the JCC, with Renewal, Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox synagogues, and with the Moishe House. And just, it was very exciting to be doing that work and be able to move a whole community to a different spot in sustainability and creating a new normal. And one little story that I'll share that I was like, oh, this is a very interesting, special place, is that in Boulder, there's a Jewish goat co-op. And once a month, the JCC would host a meeting called Schmoozers, where people working in the Jewish professional world would come in once a month and share what they're up to and connect. And this included staff from the Hillel, from the different synagogues, various JCC departments, et cetera. And there was anywhere from 25 to 45 people usually at those meetings. And a representative from the goat co-op would come and announce, the goats are pregnant. The goats had babies. And this was a normal announcement to hear in the Jewish professional space. And it was really a delight to just see that understanding the seasons, that the CSA was, the Community Supported Agriculture Program was starting up, our Jewish community CSA, that the baby goats were being born yet again. That's what it felt so Jewish, connecting us to the seasons, to the times of the year. And so being able to take those learnings into my national work is exciting, and look forward to sharing more and hearing from the rest of you.
So thank you very, very much. And I want to just add, I think, as I go in a segue to Yakir, that one of the things that I think is actually really genuinely interesting and that we all should be thinking about right now is about communities and contiguous institutions, as well as individual institutions. I think, Becky, that what we saw happen in Boulder over the last 10 years, when the locus of attention is Jewish, that's a place where many things we disagree. I'm Reform, I'm Orthodox, she's this, they're that. And one of the things that I think we actually saw in Boulder, you were centrally involved in this, was things like goats and the beginnings of the Boulder Jewish Commons and the beginnings of the farm being something that people came together on. Historically, the Jewish community came together to fight for Soviet Jewry, but now the Soviet Jews have been released, came together to defend Israel. Well, that's no longer a source of unity within the Jewish community. And I think that this piece of taking a larger challenge, a key human challenge at the moment, and using it to bring people together, I think that's starting to be profound within the Jewish community. And I guess I say that not only for everybody to think about, but Yakir as a segue to you. So Yakir is a dear friend and colleague, and one of the great Jewish environmental leaders of this generation. But one of the things that's interesting is that, again, in the time that I've known you, you went to Pearlstone, which was not an environmental organization, and basically said, oh, I'll set up a little environmental farm here called Kayam. And you did that well. And then the executive director left. So you applied for that job and they were like, okay, he can be the temporary executive director. And now you're the executive director. And in a sense, the values of Kayam have now become the values of Pearlstone. And Pearlstone, which is part of the Associated, has become a significant player within the wider community. So again, we're thrilled to welcome you and interested to hear you comment on some of that. Tell us about how you get to be here and what's exciting about it.
Thank you, Nigel. It's great to be here with you, Becky and Sue and Anna and everyone. And happy Tu B'Shvat. I know this Tu B'Shvat is different than in years past, but really, really important to be with you all today. And thank you to all the organizers and partners that create this amazing Climate Fest. Such a big step for our community. So as Nigel said, I am the CEO of the Pearlstone Center. We are a 180-acre campus that really has become one of the foremost sites in North America for transformative and immersive Jewish experiences. We have a big retreat center, immersive retreat center, many different Jaffe programs, Jewish outdoor food farming, environmental education, from summer camps to Hebrew School on the Farm, day school programs, really the full breadth of demographics, youth and families, young adults, leaders and influencers. We have a very robust certified organic farm, over 10 acres now. And Becky, to your story about goats, I think our equivalent story is that we've actually had Hebrew School on the Farm field trips witness the goats giving birth, which is not something you forget as a Hebrew School student. One of the students in one of those groups said, that was amazing, and I am not going to eat my lunch now. So really witnessing life on the farm, really for Jewish kids growing up in Baltimore over the last 15 years, since I got here 14 years ago, agriculture, land, nature is a part of Jewish life and Jewish education. And that's a culture change that we've been cultivating now for quite a while. On our campus, we also have a lot of ecosystem restoration projects we're doing, reforestation, meadow restoration. We just got some very significant funding from the state to do a big stream restoration project. We're in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and so there's a big priority on stream restoration projects. So we're doing that work, and we also more and more, and this really speaks to the climate focus here today, have been for the last 7 years or so managing a community sustainability initiative that is both greening Pearlston as a model site, but also working with the entire Jewish community to reduce our carbon footprint and really try to improve our entire community, entire Jewish community and beyond from an environmental perspective. So we currently impact over 20,000 annual participants. My role as CEO is to work on our master plan and fundraising, work with our board, develop organizational partnerships. All of this is, prior to and after COVID, which is a whole other story. I come to this work really inspired deeply by Hazon, by the Isabel Friedman Jewish Retreat Center. I was a Teva educator. I'm proud to say the first Teva Adama intermarriage. My wife is an Adamanik. So really coming up and being deeply, deeply inspired by the movement. And when I see the next generation rising, it's really, really humbling and inspiring to me. And, when I see the things that are happening across the country in this Jewish climate movement, I think about the work that we've been able to do, as Nigel mentioned, in trying to change institutions and trying to move institutions forward. What is the DNA? What are the brand values of us at Pearlstone? How have we developed partnerships with our federation? Also with the JCRC, the political arm, we have a big solar farm project that we're developing with our entire federation. And we've also been able to work with our JCRC and do advocacy at the local level on climate action. We are running a session tomorrow for the Climate Fest called "What Does a Comprehensive Community-Wide Solar Initiative Look Like?" I'll put that in the chat information there that really sort of unpacks this. And I think those partnerships with mainstream legacy institutions have been a big part of our success, and excited to talk more about that with everyone.
Thank you. So I'm gonna ask everybody a follow-up question, but as I do that, I want to say to everybody who's watching, this is your sort of like 5-minute warning, as it were, 5-7 minute warning that after this, I'm actually going to open it for any questions that any of you wants to ask. I think before we're clearly, as we end this session, we're actually going to come back to like specific things that people can be doing as an individual, as leaders within the Jewish community at lots of different levels. But I think I do want to ask, and in a way it may even be easier to ask this now that we actually have a new government and the sun is shining. But it's hard to think about these huge issues, right? It's the issue of climate for the world. At some point, Becky, you were talking about reading Walden and being inspired by it. As you said that, I remembered that I'd read a book by Tom Hartman called The Ancient, I forgot what it's called now, but a book that I read 25 years ago that had a huge impact on me. On the one hand, we can read things that can prompt and provoke us to act or to change our views. But at the same time, doing this work can be hard. And each one of us, Anna, you're a teenager, and there are a growing number of teenagers who are weighing in on this, but many teenagers are not. Becky, you've done amazing work around food, and slowly but surely the Jewish community is changing, but not everybody gets it. Sue, you've seen it firsthand, not only what amazing work ICAR is doing, but that it is a slug to raise money and to keep things going. Yakir, you've had all sorts of challenges along the way and things that weren't possible or people said couldn't be done. I'm really interested to know personally, and by the way, you don't have to answer this. I throw this to any of you if you feel inspired. To anybody who's ever felt overwhelmed or depressed by this stuff, whether on a large scale or a small scale, do you meditate? Do you go and kick the wall? Do you take time out? What's your advice to us?
I'm happy to take a stab at that. I've actually had a really great, I don't know, I guess the term is reckoning or understanding the past year or so. And I'll say that I've always struggled. There's this Jewish teaching that in one pocket you're supposed to have, for my sake was this world created, and in your other pocket, I am but dust and ashes. The trick is to know like what message to pull out of which pocket at which time. And I've always wondered, do I matter? Do my choices matter? I'm just one person. I can't go get those polar bears off the shrinking ice caps. Like I can't shut down this pipeline individually, and felt very overwhelmed by that. And questioned whether my actions mattered. I will say I always maintained the emotional, the behavior. Like I never stopped acting as sustainably as I felt that I could at the time, and continue to try and improve. But it was emotionally like a drain and a struggle. And a little over a year ago, I read a book by Jonathan Safran Foer called We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast. And I had the privilege of reading this book for work and actually needing to read it 2 or 3 times through, because we created a discussion guide for Jewish communities to go with the book. And I left that book really clear that I, as an individual, and my choices matter. And so that's been a lot of what I've been kind of preaching to people since then. And one of the things that I find really challenging or difficult, or really just frustrating, is that there seems to be a lot of infighting within the environmental movement, like on our own team, about personal choice and whether that matters. And there's a lot of people or organizations that will say, no, if you focus on individual choice, that's letting the corporations and government off the hook, and the changes have to happen at the systemic and holistic level. And these things are just, they're not mutually exclusive. And we need bottom up and top down and sideways in. We need all of the above. And in fact, doing any of them feeds the others. There's this great quote that was in a recent story from the Sierra Club that was actually just shared in a Tu B'Shvat Seder that I was part of this week. And they concluded that it really requires both approaches, and to rely on any one lets the other off the hook. And they argue that once you start to change your individual behavior, you're also more likely to demand that the larger systems change as well. The quote from the article is, when we take responsibility for the environmental consequences of our daily actions, we feel like we are in control. And when you're in control of your own life, perhaps then you'll feel more empowered to take control of, or at least play a role in, larger political systems. So it's a really positive feedback loop. And so just remembering how much just what I do in my life really does matter, and not only the ripple effects, but how it feeds other things, how it influences other people. Like, never question the potency of your choices. And it feels great to be in that spot.
I love that you said all of that, by the way. I just want to say, one of the things that's so amazing about Jewish tradition compared to the Western education system, the Western education system says you learn something once and then you go on and you do it. Once you've done the English Civil War or the American Civil War, been there, done that, now I'm doing Europe in the 19th century or whatever. Jewish tradition says, no, you come back to it, you come back to it, you come back to it. And I was literally, Becky, as you were talking just now, I was like, yes. And I felt better. And I really thank you for that. Sue, you're up.
Yeah, the question is what's most challenging. So for me, I'm angry all the time. We're working in communities of color, marginalized communities that are hardest hit by environmental issues. In Detroit, people don't have water. We worked for years. Detroit Jews for Justice, Hazon in Detroit, so are working as allies to try to make sure that the system doesn't turn, the government doesn't turn water off. They just are having a trial with the governor who allowed people in Flint to be poisoned and killed because they were poor people, the poor communities. Here in Denver, there is so much growth in Denver, Metro Denver and Boulder. There's so much cement. We're expecting here, just as everywhere, that in the summers we're going to have 3 months over 95 degrees and people are going to die. And we have a I'm pointing to where it is. I can just about see it. There's a Suncor petroleum processing plant that's in the middle of the city that was put in the middle of a historic Mexican community, actually the oldest community of Mexico when Mexico was Denver. When Denver was part of Mexico, it's that old of a community, and that community is sick. They're sicker. And the thing that is most striking for me is that, what's challenging for me is climate change itself. We're an urban farm, and we're in the middle of the third year of a mega drought, where there literally is no precipitation. I mean, we have a 1/4 inch of snow on the ground, but we we don't have a snowpack this year. The science guys are telling us that within 5 years, we will not be able to farm south of Colorado Springs, kind of the middle of Colorado, because there won't be enough water for commercial agriculture. And they're saying that within 10, that'll be the case here up in Denver. So for a state that the majority of its income comes from agriculture, we're looking at how will people afford water? How are people going to stay cool? What's our responsibility as a Jewish community to act on these issues in a way that's going to protect people? So I'm super interested in working with our congregations, because in my position I have access to them, to see if can we put in food force so that people around the community, not just the Jewish members of that congregation, can have a place to come to, because we have assets in our community that can be deployed for responses to this. I just keep thinking about the reframing of choose life. What does that mean in this context of global extinction, planetary suffering due to the actions that we collectively, our society as people, as a species, have done? So for me, there's real people suffering every day on this. There's real people hurting. So that's
Sue,
with that.
you did a good job of sharing things that upset you or make you angry. But the second half of the question was, and then how do you get out of bed after that? And it may be that at the very end you're answering that, but I'm really interested to know genuinely, like that was a legitimately strong list of things that are really upsetting. And I've seen you plug away in a remarkable way. How do you make that bridge?
I have a serious morning davening practice, and I have a contemplative meditation practice. If I did not have those practices, it's really important to be able to, for me, to monitor my nervous system and calm it down so that I don't run out of steam. I mean, we have to be in it for the long haul. So those kind of practices from our tradition really, for me, keep me able to get out of bed.
Brilliant, thank you. And Anna and Yakir, you can add anything if you want, and equally you don't have to. Like the floor is open, and then I'm going to open the floor to everybody to ask any questions.
Yeah, I'd love to add, actually. Just one thing that I think is really challenging for me on a regular basis is that from my position as a teen and a high schooler, I'm like witnessing this generation of people who are growing up with there constantly being more climate headlines in the news, like this constant influx of really devastating information, like what Sue mentioned. And so for some people that compels them to pursue activism, to speak out. And for some people, it just compels them to say, I can't do anything about this. This is too big an issue and I can't have an impact. So something that I think that definitely gets me through this kind of thinking is this one quote by the namesake of my school, Abraham Joshua Heschel. He said, every word counts, every deed is power. Or no, sorry, every deed counts, every word is power. But same message, I think. And just that idea that every single action we take can have an impact like that. I mean, one of the things that gets me through it is looking at all the amazing actions that teens around the country are doing. So observing the impact that people who might have originally thought they couldn't make a change can have is really inspiring.
I want to add, by the way, we're going to go to Yakir for a last word on this, but Hazon's office, which we used to have way back when, BC, before COVID, is downtown Manhattan. And there was a particular day, whenever it wasn't much more than a year ago, when Greta Thunberg was arriving in New York by boat. And we came out of it's going to make me cry now. When we came out of the office to go and greet her, and there were like 5,000 people there. And she became Greta Thunberg. Like, it so happened she became famous. But she didn't start off as somebody who's famous. She started off as an unknown 15-year-old kid in an unknown school, in an unknown town, who essentially took seriously the quote that you just gave of Heschel's and was like, okay, like, I read something, I'm going to do something, I'm one little kid, fine, it's only me. And it was, find it incredibly moving. Yakir.
Thank you, Nigel. It is moving, and I think it is because, and we hear this from our president now, and from leaders in our government. This is existential, and that is by definition overwhelming. I think it was, and this is true particularly over the last 4 years, but in the climate sense, it's true for longer than that. But I think it was Jon Stewart who said, you know, the presidency is supposed to age the president, but if you look at how we all look now compared to how we looked 4 years ago, we've all gone through a lot. And that dynamic has been true with climate. As you know, we can probably each go back to the moment where it hit us, and we've like a ton of bricks, like we wear now this low grade or high grade stress, like walking around with the knowledge, if we accept science, of what this means for our planet and our species and multiple generations. And that is heavy. And you know, what is hardest for me in an immediate sense, you know, we went through due to COVID, a terrible reduction in forest, a 65% reduction in forest. Had to say goodbye to many, many beloved colleagues. And I tap into that when I think about this question, because what is true for that, I think is true for this too. Like, how did I get through that? Like, I spent a fair amount of time over the course of the month leading up to that of just like walking and crying, you know, like releasing it. If we hold this in and we like do not find outlets for that pain and that mourning, that grief, that's not healthy. We have to be able to release it. We have to be able to express it. I move my body. I try to like feel embodied in the world and try to be with family and friends who I can love and laugh with and play with and find like the simple pleasures on a daily basis to remember that I am alive and I do have agency. And, you know, I think more than anything else in the secular world where people may not feel drawn to religion, the people who are being called to, like, of their own accord, called to act on this are embodying emunah and faith in some of the most powerful ways we have seen in like human history, in a way that like is reminiscent of the civil rights movement, like in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, stepping up into the space to act on it. And I want to just offer everyone, you know, faith itself can even feel like out of reach sometimes, but that word emunah comes from the root of amen. So to like begin a path towards faith, we don't have to articulate it ourselves. We don't have to do everything, but if we can hear a prayer or a yearning or a desire for a more sustainable future, and we can say, amen, I want that, I believe in that, that is like a step towards faith. And from there, we can like celebrate the wins every day, every step that we take. And it was enough today. And then take the next step from there.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to add, by the way, this occurred to me early on, even as somebody was speaking. I also want to say, particularly on this day of Tu B'Shvat, I do think it's important to like walk in natural places and walk amongst trees. Sue most clearly made the point earlier on that environmentalism at the end of the day isn't simply or merely or even mostly about trees. It's actually about urban environments and human beings in that sense. But actually, to be in natural places is, I think, A, nourishing for us, and B, reminds us in a sense of where we come from and our connections. So with that, we're a small group. I'm just going to open it. Well, let's go to a gallery view and just go ahead and demute yourself. If you're not allowed to, Bruce, let people demute themselves. And anybody is invited, just go ahead and demute yourself and fire away if you have a question. And it could be for all of our panelists or just for some of them, but the virtual floor is open.
Hey, Nigel, it's Richard Slutsky. And number one, thank you all panelists for your conversation. This is, you know, really great to hear from you at this particular time. And I have a question really for all of the panelists, but mostly for Anna. So one of the concerns that I have is that here we are, and I think Kira said it, this is an existential crisis. And I'm looking at the Zoom call and there are 27 participants. It should be 2,700. How do we get more people involved to think like we're all thinking?
I can start with the answer to that, just my thoughts on that. So yeah, I think that's definitely a really important thing you bring up, that it should be 2,700 people on the Zoom call. It should be a vast majority of the people in the Jewish community and in the world involved in environmentalism. But I think we do need to think about this holistically. is definitely, like someone said earlier, like a massive increase in the Jewish community's engagement with environmentalism, even in the last 10 years. And over the next few years, as the Jewish community becomes really centered around the value of tikkun olam, I think that's only going to grow. But you're right, it is definitely a challenge to make sure that people are as engaged in this movement as they can be. And I think one of the really important ways to do that is to center the voice of youth in the movement, to show all the teenagers out there, all the young people, like models for how they can make a change, how they can participate in fighting the climate crisis. I think that's one of the really important ways that we can engage people more.
I do want to add to that, by the way, and I say this very happily and non-defensively, and I certainly wouldn't want to disagree in any way with our questioner, who happens to be my board chair for disclosure as well as everything else. But actually, as part of this climate festival, there are something like 170 sessions. And it's not just that over 3,500 or 4,000 people have signed up, but in fact, if only 27 people went to each of those sessions, it would come to more than 4,500 people. And in fact, there may well be more of them. And so in fact, just in the midst of these 3 or 4 days, we think that probably a larger number of Jewish people across the country have more coherently engaged with this topic than in any previous Tu B'Shvat, certainly in this format. Now, of course, your question is still right, because the question is still, well, that's nice, but shouldn't it be 40,000? And it shouldn't be 400,000. But I do want to say that because it's important to locate this session within the wider festival. And the festival is located, by the way, within the extraordinary range of groups and people all over the country doing stuff. And that itself, by the way, is inspiring. And it's also, I will say straightforwardly, one of the things that Hazon exists to do, which is actually to strengthen this movement, to connect, to amplify, and we're sort of excited to do that. I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions, and I'm going to let any of the panelists, you can all loop back to Richard's question as well, but I think I want to take a couple more questions from anybody, and then, yes, Diane.
I am in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'm trying to get my conservative congregation involved in a climate resolution in our city for carbon neutrality in 2030. And I'm trying to figure out ways of encouraging, getting them to get on board with this or other measures toward that. And so I would love any suggestions.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got, how do we get more people involved generally? That was Richard's question. Diane's saying we want to get people in Grand Rapids, Michigan to sign on to a particular resolution or commitment. How do we do that? Going to take one more question from anybody, and then we're going to go back to our panelists. And I may not see you, so just demute yourself if you want to ask something.
I have a question. So I live in South Florida, and my family, you know, my partner and I, we're constantly faced with this question. Like, we feel like, you know, sea level rise is happening. It's not something anyone can ignore anymore. And so we're constantly faced with this question, like, do we leave? Do we run away? Or what do we do in the face of a community that is rapidly changing? You know, what do we do?
Amazing question. By the way, it goes back to what Sue was saying earlier on about climate changes happening not just in the world or in America, but in Colorado and affecting agriculture. So Becky, Sue, Yakir, Anna, feel free, any of you, to dive in on any of those questions. You don't have to answer all of them. Sue, you're up.
Well, I'll say to the first 2 questions, because the last question is such a big one. I'll say that you know, I think 27 people is enough people to create change. I think whoever shows up in the room is in the right place, and I'm never worried about what are the numbers, because each of us change. You know, in the environmental movement and in the social justice movement in general, it's kind of a truism that change happens at the speed of relationship. So as long as we are all talking about this, and you are taking this out and talking about these issues and working on these issues, you work in circles and people in your circles work in other circles. And it's our job to kind of network it out. And I would never worry about how many people have shown up, because each of us in this call are interested in working on this, and we all have agency to be able to create change. So how do you create change and make people, help people, to encourage people to sign up on any initiative? You've got to call a bunch of meetings. You've got to take a bunch of meetings and meet with a lot of people. You've got to knock on doors. It's old-fashioned organizing can help create enough traction and action to, it's harder to hold meetings in person these days, but it's super easy to hold meetings on Zoom. I mean, this festival is an example of that. So I think you can't wait for people to come on board. You've got to endlessly use the tactics of old-fashioned Saul Alinsky style front porch activism and just talk to everyone and ask everyone to make 2 calls. And it'll happen. It'll happen. For the last question, I would say, I fantasize a lot about the coming new frontiers. And I wonder if some people shouldn't, there's likely to be the ProPublica article that came out this year, the summary of the study that said where people aren't going to be able to live in 50 years and where people are going to live for agriculture, that everything in America is going to move north. Sometimes I fantasize about how do we create stops along the future migration route, and how do we start setting up funds now to help people who don't have the money to move be able to move, and how do some people go and be advanced people and set up centers for the coming climate migrants. I mean, that's the only way I think about it these days.
So these are some big questions. And a couple of things that came to mind in terms of organizational change in a particular institution, especially a synagogue, is to find the Annas, find the youth, because I think there's a certain amount of moral authority that the youth have that the rest of us won't be able to carry. And I actually think that applies to the seniors as well. And I think it would be pretty powerful if you have the 80-somethings and the teens in your community coming to the board or to the clergy or whoever's got the authority to be making decisions about whether you sign on to this. I think that those are among the harder demographics to ignore. And so if you're able to build some interest there, but I would also flag that think about the process, not just the outcome. And if you go about this in a way of educating people and building consensus and doing what Sue was just saying, calling those meetings and educating people, even if you don't sign on to that, you've still had a lot of success. So think about your process and the journey and the impact of that, regardless of this single outcome that you have your eye on at this moment, and to hold that as part of it. And then, boy, I'm thinking a lot about what was shared about the being in South Florida, in Colorado. Not only do we have these droughts, but this brutal heat. And I was on a Tu B'Shvat Seder last night for run out of Boulder, talking about climate change and wildfires. And we've had the 3 biggest wildfires in Colorado's history this year, including right in my county, seeing smoke billowing in the foothills from my home. And it's here, it's now. And so I think there's a lot that's the conversation starting to be talking about not only how do we stop climate change, but also adaptation and resilience. And so if you're not familiar with those terms, those are rising conversations that we're having. How do we adapt? How do we become resilient? And the good news is that a lot of what we do for adaptation and resilience is the same things we need to be doing to be slowing down and reversing climate change. And so that's not very specific, and because we don't have enough time to dive into that exactly, but go down the adaptation and resilience rabbit holes, and you'll hopefully find some inspiration and guidance there.
Thank you, Yakir. Yakir and then Anna.
Yeah, really, really wonderful questions. I think I want to take them in reverse order. So Rachel, South Florida, I have family and friends there, and recently was talking to the head of the one of the federations down there, and was asking him, like, so you're a leader in the Jewish community. Is this community going to be here if the sea rises? How does the Jewish community think about this? And he said, well, we have a great stormwater management task force in the county. so we got it covered. It's like, no, I'm not talking about stormwater. I mean, I am talking about stormwater, but the sea is right. So I think there's an ongoing challenge to help institutions and leaders really grapple with the depth and breadth of this crisis. And I think that's true everywhere. Certainly it varies from community to community. And I've also grappled with like, where is the place to make best impact? And I'd say, it really is a personal thing of where do you feel called? And a dear friend, director of Adama, Shamu, once said to me, like, follow the signs, look for the signs and follow the signs. So that's my esoteric advice there. On advocacy, I think I want to echo what Becky said. Looking to where are the influence points, the leverage points, for individuals, like whose voices can be really influential in the ecosystem of a congregation, and then not just individuals, but institutions. What institutional partnerships? We've partnered with the JCRC here in Baltimore. We've also partnered with the League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, and how can we bring those institutional partners to bear on a situation? You might find there's some Jews in there, and they might have congregational connections. There could be partners in unforeseen places, and the synagogue might find that by actually raising their voice on this, people come through the doors that we haven't seen before, and it could actually be a powerful outreach tool. I think the most important question is really about scale, Richard, to your question. And I just want to say, we were talking about this before the session started. Yesterday the president gave a powerful speech and signed some executive orders on climate in a just huge sea change from where we were 2 weeks ago. And I think there is an important moment we are in the months ahead when we think about climate legislation, and in the years ahead, where this country and our society has an opportunity to really take giant leaps forward. And I think that will depend on partnerships and relationships. I think it will also depend on action. How can we show proof of concept that this works, that electric vehicles work, that institutions can run this way and be successful, and really looking to lift up those case studies. Again, I want to plug our session tomorrow that we're doing a community-wide, a federation-wide solar farm, and have weighed into advocacy as well. And I think just looking at these next few months and few years as a critical moment to really try to turn up the scale.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, I think that was so well said. And I also wanted to start by echoing a piece that Becky mentioned, which is just about the importance of intergenerational work in climate advocacy. I think that's so important, the idea of like young people learning from adults, adults learning from young people. And I think that's going to be something that drives the movement forward and creates really substantial change. I know in all the opportunities I've had to learn from adult environmental activists who have been involved in this fight for so long, it's been so inspiring for me and has been really impactful in making change as well. And one more piece I want to bring up about, I guess, ways to make effective impact is the importance of storytelling. For example, I think that it's really important for people to understand not just like the facts behind climate change, all of like the really devastating numbers that are getting thrown at them constantly to the extent that people can often become numb to them, but personal stories. For example, if you're somewhere on the front lines of climate change where your shore is sinking underwater, it's really important for you to tell your personal story with that, to make that well known, because people are going to connect with that story a lot more than they would with figures. So I think storytelling is also a really important tool of advocacy in that sense.
Thank you. So we're about to wrap, and across all of the sessions in this Climate Fest, we're actually encouraging people to go forward and take action steps. For Hazon, we've now been saying for a while, we've been talking about our Brit Hazon, and we've been saying that all of us need to do three things. Number one, we need to make some further change in our own behavior. Not that it's sufficient by itself, but it's the minimum we need to do to look ourselves in the mirror or say anything to anybody else. Number two, we need to give time and money to organizations doing this work. And number three, we need to speak up for wider change, whether it's within the Jewish community or public space. So I just want to go to each of our panelists for a last quick word and invite you, if you want, to say, well, what is one change you think we should all make? What is one organization we should all support? And feel free, by the way, to say your own as well as anybody else's. What is one way that we can each speak up in the Jewish community or more broadly for wider change? So any of you, but punctually, one or two brief last things.
I can jump in first, and I think that I would recommend that everybody consider supporting Hazon as a national leader in this culture change work across the Jewish community. And I would also say, in terms of building partnerships, think about who are the 500-pound gorilla Jewish institutions in your ecosystem, and what is a relationship there that you could start to cultivate and see who are the folks on the inside of those institutions that can help make change in the power centers in our community.
Thank you.
I would say support Hazon, as Hazon plays and has played such an important role, and will continue to do so, and find your local organizations that are working on these issues and support them too. I think that if you are in a congregation or a Jewish organization, what you can do is form a committee, get a group of people together, work within the structures within your organization, and try to advance some of these actions and issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think it's so important to support Hazon, like the other panelists have mentioned, and especially if your institution isn't already under the Hazon Seal of Sustainability, to get that up and running, because I think it's such an important way to promote institutional change. I also think that joining the Jewish Youth Climate Movement is a really impactful way to make change, a little bit predictable, but if you are a Jewish teen, if you know Jewish teens who are interested in environmentalism or social justice, I really recommend that you start a chapter of JYCM. You can always reach out to us from our website to start building your own chapter. We also have another Climate Fest event, hearing from some of the top young Jewish climate activists. I'm going to put the link in the chat right now. It's on Sunday, so I really encourage you to attend that as well.
Thank you. Becky.
So there's a song, "Oh Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary." And so our bodies, our choices, and so I'm thinking about food we eat, it comes into our bodies. And so I want to point you to the Brit Hazon that Nigel mentioned, and a couple of the choices you can make there are transitioning to plant-rich diets or reducing food waste. It's such a visceral daily way to practice everything we've been talking about here. So I point you to the Brit Hazon. Please sign up there to make a change and consider the food-based ones, and to be a sanctuary, to prepare yourself. And just two last quick tips is celebrate progress. I know that there can be a sense of like, we're not all the way there, but that's a good step in the right direction, but it's not enough. Yes, and celebrate progress. Please don't not celebrate that progress. And lastly, I want to just quote Granny D. Haddock, who I wish was a rabbi. I'm just going to call her rabbi. She's not even Jewish, but she was an activist who walked across the United States when she was 89, walked across the United States when she was 89 to raise awareness about the issues she cared about, which for her was campaign finance reform. But Granny D. Haddock said, "Aren't we privileged to live at a time when everything is at stake and when our efforts make a difference between the eternal contest between the forces of light and shadow? Oh, be joyful that you are a warrior in this great time." So embrace the power that you have and the luckiness that we have here right now, and take actions and be joyful about it. We are actually quite fortunate that we matter so much.
So, Becky, Sue, Anna, Yakir, first of all, a humongous thank you to each of you. Thank you to everybody who joined us for this session. I want to give a last plug for something that we haven't mentioned, but I do want to say at the very, very end. At 1 o'clock this Sunday, we're going to do a session about the forthcoming Shemitah Year, the sabbatical year in Jewish life. And I want to say that the Shemitah Year is going to start this coming September. And it's actually a remarkable piece of Jewish tradition. It seems really appropriate today on Tu B'Shvat to mention it. And we're going to be thinking then about what the Shemitah Year means, and how we can register it more deeply, how we can learn from it, and how we can use it to drive systemic change over the next 7 full-year cycle of Jewish life. For now, for me, and from all of us, I want to say Tu B'Shvat Sameach. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for collectively lifting us up. And thank you perhaps most of all for enabling each one of us to feel, as I feel right now, that we're really honoring Tu B'Shvat, this ancient tradition of marking the change of the cycle, of marking the beginning of the natural year, by deepening into Jewish life on the one hand, but also pointing outwards to make a healthier and a more sustainable world for everybody. Thank you so much. Goodbye.